I am Melanie Traylor, and today we are kicking off the Little Miss Sawtooth Star Quilt. I thought we'd start by just getting all of our flying geese units out of the way. There are 60 flying geese units in this quilt. That's a lot of geese. They make up our star points in each of our star blocks. So each star block has 4 flying geese. Doing it this way, we're not going to be making geese every other week. We're just going to be able to grab our geese, make the rest of our star block, and put it all together to finish the block. So I'm going to be showing you how to make them 4 at a time with the no waste method. I've got a few tricks to hopefully help you on the way. So let's go make some geese. So I've gone ahead and I've cut everything I need for all 60 flying geese units that are in this quilt. Remember, the flying geese are going to be our star points for each of the star blocks. So I've taken 15 fat quarters and I've cut 4 3 7/8 squares out of each of the 15 fat quarters. So each of my stars gets a different color star points. So our A fabric is our background, and then our B fabric is our star points. Start out, we're just going to draw a line diagonally. You can use anything, a pen, from one corner to the next corner. And then we're going to have our A fabric here, and then we're going to take our B squares and we are going to put them flush with the corner right here so that the diagonal lines, this way the diagonal line meets up and runs right through there. I'm going to put a pin in them to hold them in place. Now I'm going to go sew a 1/4 inch on both sides of my drawn line. So here's what that ends up looking like. We're going to take our ruler and line it up on top of our drawn line, and then take your rotary cutter and cut this into 2 pieces. Now we're just going to press to set our seam. And then one at a time, we're going to push out these little triangles and press. And notice that I'm not doing this number. I'm pressing my iron up and down. We're going to do the same thing for the other one. Then we're going to throw some starch on them. So before we move on to the next step in making our 4 flying geese units, I want to show you a common problem. So here's a flying geese unit, and it looks okay, but this is happening, and this is the actual size that it's supposed to be, and this one is just a little short. So it's fine. It's like I said, it's a common problem, and I've finished quilts that had a lot of these in it. You just end up having to fudge a little to make it work, but it can work. It just kind of weakens your seam, and then you run the risk with use and washing of your quilt of this seam busting open. So I want to show you a way to avoid this happening to you. Our next step is going to be to take these other 2 B squares and make them flush on these corners. So we do want them flush on the corner, but we also want this point of the square to be centered between these 2. And I just eyeball it, but it needs to be centered. I'm gonna put a pin in these to hold them in place once I do feel like I have them centered. So just because I put a pin in it and I feel like I've got it in the right place doesn't mean that when I take it to my sewing machine it still is in the right place. Fabric just tends to shift a little sometimes. So when I put this through my sewing machine, I'm going to move this little guy around until I know that he is center. When I do, I'm going to send it through the sewing machine, and I'm going to go sew down this way, turn it around, and then sew back this way, a 1/4 inch on both sides of my drawn line. Here's the tip. Your 1/4 inch should begin right there. So if it's centered, it works out to that being the right place. And then when you finish and you're coming back down this way, you end up right there at that little point. So you start here and you end there. If your drawn line is in the right place, your square is in the right place on your unit right here, and your 1/4 inch seam allowance is correct, you will end up right where you're supposed to be, and that stops this from happening. So they end up looking like that after you've sewn them. We are going to line up our ruler on our drawn line and trim. We end up with 4 units. So now I'm just going to press to set all of my seams. And then we will pop each of these out. You notice that I do have that straight line right there, which is exactly what I want. I'm gonna throw some starch on them and then press them again. So now I just need to trim them all up. So they should already measure 3.5 by 6.5 inches, but we're just gonna cut these little tails off just like this. We're gonna do that for all of them. So here is my flying geese unit. If you do end up with that little whoopsie, don't stress about it too much. We're making 60 flying geese units in this quilt. I can't tell you how many times I had to do this to get them to work out right. Sometimes I'm just not being mindful enough and I still end up with this, which I am using this in my quilt. So don't think I'm not going to. I'm not remaking it. I'm using it. This is how they end up as stars.